Welcome everybody to our first TechX event here at Simply Business, hosted by the InfoSec team. I'm Wayne Moore. I'm the Chief Information Security Officer responsible for Global Information Security Strategy for Simply Business. Who are we? Simply Business is an online insurance broker with over 600,000 customers covering about 1,000 different businesses. We're also a great place to work. We've won the Sunday Times Best Companies to Work for 2015, 2016. And excuse me, since then, we've been focusing on our B Corp certification. If you're not familiar with B Corp, this is a certification that companies can go for that will also encourage you to give back to your communities, to society, to your employees, your customers. If you don't know about it, I highly recommend you check it out. You'll probably be surprised how many companies you use day to day are already B Corp certified. Very important to us, we value equal opportunities and diversity. We have a number of initiatives and programs with targets within the organization, and we're currently doing pretty well on those. Let's give you a bit of information about our security team and how we're structured. Our whole security function comprises 3 sub-functions: our assurance function, operations, and engineering. Engineering are responsible for protect, shield, defend, and prevent. The assurance team for governance, risk, and compliance and our education program. And our operations team, which is formalized in our Security Operations Center, is responsible for monitoring, hunting, detecting, and responding to threats to the organization. The team is currently at about 18 people. That's global, so we've got 2 people in the States and 16 people here in the UK at the moment, looking to move that up to about 21 this year, which is close to double on what it was last year. So it just goes to show how important security is to Simply Business. So vulnerability management is the topic for this evening. Just want to set the stage. Who agrees with the following statement? Vulnerability management is patch management. No hands. I do. I'm joking. Thanks, Ed. That's right. Patching is a very important part, but it's not everything. To have an efficient and effective vulnerability management program, you need to be focusing on your attack surface. That is reducing the devices, unnecessary devices, applications, services in your environment. Without doing that, you're going to waste a lot of time and energy managing unnecessary things. Vulnerability management requires a coordinated effort. So tonight you're going to hear from all various people from each of the sub-teams on how they do it day to day. Tonight, you'll hear from Ed and Dan, who are in our security engineering team, Laura from our Security Operations Center, and Panna from our assurance team. Thank you all for coming, and I hope you enjoy the night.
Okay. Oh, sorry, guys. So hello everyone, welcome. My name's Panna Begum and I work in the assurance team. Today I'm going to give a brief introduction into vulnerability management policies, some certain things to consider, what you need to involve in a vulnerability management program, and also some top tips on what to look for in a vulnerability management solution. So I know Wayne just briefly went over it, but can anyone out here give me a definition as to what they think vulnerability management is? Anyone else? Okay, well, here at Simply Business, when we talk about vulnerability management, what we refer to is finding and fixing weaknesses within our organization's infrastructure. So our main goal is to be able to apply these fixes as soon as possible and reduce the likelihood of any attackers exploiting any of these vulnerabilities. So in order to do that, we need to have a vulnerability management policy which clearly defines and determines the correct security controls that are needed in order to keep your main systems and applications secure. one good thing to remember is when you draft your policies, consider the technology that you might want to use, consider the people and the processes in order to be able to have a comprehensive, integrated vulnerability management program. Another reason why people use vulnerability management policy is if they need to adhere to certain example compliances. And I'll give you an example with Simply Business. Last year, we submitted an application to be compliant for a regulation called the New York Cyber Regulation. And this is basically a regulation for anyone who wishes to trade in New York. They need to meet certain requirements. One of their key requirements was to carry out vulnerability assessments at least twice per year. So what we had to do as a result was review our security infrastructure, also look into vulnerability assessments, and where necessary, bolster our program and update and review our policies accordingly. I don't know how you move this, sorry. No. So just a few key topics that you can add in your vulnerability management policy is scan targets. At the end of the day, you need to know what's going to be in scope for your vulnerability management. And if there are going to be certain things that are going to be out of scope, what do you plan to do with those? Ideally, each organization should have an inventory management solution or a list where it lists out all the key devices which you can use as a source of truth and use it to understand where your devices are, where your end user devices, servers are, to be able to carry out these scans. Another key point is the frequency and your schedule. So for some organizations, they might want to do this weekly. Another organization, it might be monthly. So it really depends on your business requirements and your business model. And if you need to meet any compliances for any regulations, example would be PCI. They require frequent scans and frequent reports with this kind of information. When it comes to reporting, this is key because in order to be able to get funding for vulnerability management, you need to have stakeholder buy-in, and reporting is a brilliant way of getting this. You will have, in your reporting, it should show you what your high priority risks are and also how you can resolve those. This links directly in with your remediation service levels. This is one of the key points that you must have, and your stakeholders should really be involved at this stage. You want your stakeholders to abide by these and be accountable for. So for your high risk vulnerabilities, you want to ensure that you have a shorter time frame. And for your lower risk, you entitle them to have a longer period to put the correct fixtures in place. When it comes to exception management, at the end of the day, in order for us to have a good vulnerability management program, we need to have maximum participation. Without participation, it will be difficult and you won't get the correct results. But there will be certain cases where, a business area might not be willing to be part of this scanning, or it could be that it could affect one of their core systems or processes. So this is when an assurance team example would come in place, and we work with the stakeholders regularly to come to an agreement of possible options on how we can mitigate the vulnerabilities or put certain controls in place where we can come and review them on a regular basis to make sure that that exception is acceptable. So what's my team's involvement in vulnerability management is we review our policies regularly. We make sure that the right people are informed when creating or reviewing policies, and we actually get their buy-in. So for our PCI and for our cyber regulations, as I mentioned earlier, we reached out to all the departments that have a direct impact or have a responsibility, and we made sure that they were aware what we were expecting before these policies were approved. We also carry out risk management. And we work very closely with the vulnerability management team to sit down and discuss high priority risks, where we can help them. If there's been any risks on our risk register for these vulnerabilities, how we can put actions in place to remediate those at the earliest convenience. And we carry out a lot of auditing, even on our vulnerability management team, just to make sure that they are doing what they should be doing and that they're adhering to the policies that have been written. So really quickly, I'll talk about how to plan for a vulnerability management program. Initially, it's really important to carry out a vulnerability assessment as a baseline, just so you can understand where you are and where your risks lay. You can also work with the correct teams, like the risk management team and your senior leaders, or people that specialize, if you have a risk and compliance team, to guide you and help you tailor your vulnerability management program so that you can identify risks, triage them, and deal with them as and when needed. So once you have this strategy, it needs to be converted into a plan. And this plan needs to be a defined set of processes that your vulnerability management team can follow. Because at the end of the day, they need to know what they need to do. They need to know when it needs to be done. And they also need to know who they need to escalate to if need be. See? What's really important is it's all well and good if you are able to identify these vulnerabilities, but you need to consider, do you have the resources and the capabilities to assess these vulnerabilities? Are you able to triage them and put remediation in place? This is where having a good relationship with your stakeholders would be ideal, as you can portray to them the benefits of budgets or any costing for potential vulnerability management solutions. And lastly, whatever plan that you create and whatever program that you create, it is very, very important for you to constantly review it, look for improvements, and also bring in the right people with the right knowledge to make these decisions. So there's tons and tons of references and best practices when it comes to vulnerability management. You've got your popular one, the NIST, which is a risk-based methodology. Vulnerability management comes constantly within the top 5 for CIS as well. And a lot of vulnerability management solutions use CVSS scoring in order to do their risks as well. Here at Simply Business, the vulnerability management solution that we use actually uses the CVSS scoring to input into their algorithm so that they create their own risk scoring, and we work off that. We also align that with our risk acceptance level here at Simply Business in order to give them definitive timelines on when a risk or a vulnerability needs to be actioned. And the key thing to remember here as well is what works best for your organization. So what makes a good vulnerability management solution? Obviously, you want a solution that identifies new vulnerabilities, but there's a few other things to consider. Example, based on your business, is your business all in the cloud or is it on-prem? So these are the kind of things that you should liaise with your IT department for and then come to a solution. It could be a mixture of both or a tool that's available for across. And then scanning, I'm not going to go too much into it because my colleague Laura is going to go into it in detail, but what do you actually want from the tool? That's something that we should consider. We should consider, is it solely a scanning tool or is it a full-on security monitoring tool that you want? And again, for reporting, we want to be able to have reporting where we can have an overall scorecard which we can show to our senior managers. And at the same time, we want to be able to have drill down versions so our vulnerability management team can actually work off it and then triage it and assess what works need to be carried out and when. So when it comes to support, this really does depend on the amount of support that you want as an organization. A lot of these solutions do provide 24/7 support, but also look into certifications certain solutions provide, or if they provide ad hoc training on a regular basis for your vulnerability management team to be aware of new functionalities that are coming out. And finally, one of the most important things is vendor reputation. At the end of the day, you want a solution that is reliable and that is accurate when it comes to assessing their CVSS scoring. Cool. So just to summarize, it's very, very important to be able to continuously monitor and improve your vulnerability management policy and also your program. You're going to have incidents, you may have new introduction to legislation that can restructure your whole vulnerability management program. So it's good to constantly review it. Where possible, clearly communicate the urgency of fixing these vulnerabilities and work with the right people to make sure that it's done effectively. And finally, just to leave you with, treat vulnerability management policy as one element of a core information security program where you can actually see real value by being accurate, being measurable, and also reliable. I'm going to just pass over to Laura.
Thank you, Panna. I guess the middle mic. Good evening, everyone. Nice to see you all here. Great turnout. So thank you all for coming. We really appreciate it. So my name's Laura Blackwell, and I work in our operations team, so our Security Operations Centre. And our team, they look after the vulnerability management program. We perform the scans and so on. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the sort of problems that we faced, looking at our ways of working as a business and trying to adapt a policy and trying to adapt the program to suit that. So without further ado, I'm going to start going through 4 problems, and you may or may not relate to all or some of them. So yeah, let's see. Problem number 1. You may experience some or all of these 3 different issues. When people start scans, they can cause your firewalls to hang, to start blocking traffic and cause issues on your network. You can start your application servers could start to slow down, potentially start serving errors to your customers. And finally, any legacy servers, it can just really completely ruin them and cause them to go down. And this is not ideal. So this is one of the problems with some of the traditional ways of doing vulnerability scanning. Problem number 2. Actually, let's get a raise of hands for people who can relate to each problem. So problem number 1. Cool. Glad to see it's not just me. Cool. So problem number 2. At Simply Business, we have a really good working from home, flexible working culture. And so one of the things that we have is we have people globally at our office in the US, our office here in London, our office in Northampton, and we allow people to work from home. We have a really good culture of trust, and these people can work from home a couple of days a week. Some people, such as Dan, are nearly always remote workers, come in once a week, which is great to be able to offer that flexibility. And that means that we're able to get some really great talent. One of the things as well, we have opened new sites for nearshorers. So we have people across all of Europe working for us, and we have to make sure that we're able to support them and as securely as possible as well. And some people choose to work from abroad, as I mentioned. So therefore, it's really hard to just run a standard IP-based scan across your network because they're probably just going to be sat at home on their own, and you definitely don't want to be starting scanning over VPN. So anyone relate to that? Cool. A few fewer hands, but it's cool. Problem number 3. Do you know all of your assets? So this is a really big thing, and it's not necessarily a new problem, but it's getting worse. So we, as Simply Business, we have a DevOps way of working. So we allow our developers to use new technologies such as containers and such as, allow them to spin up servers in our cloud technologies. And they're able to get those servers up in a matter of minutes. And that really allows them to develop things quickly and allows us to progress quickly as a business as well. Because we're an insurtech business, so we develop the stuff that we use to sell our insurance. And so therefore, we have to allow them to do that, but we don't want to miss them assets. And it's really difficult to be able to maintain a good database of those if they're spinning them up every few minutes, because I can bet you they won't be updating a database every time they do it. So yeah, that's problem number 3. Anyone else? Cool. A few more hands. Brilliant. Really reassuring. Problem number 4. Have you patched your coffee machine? So with the rise of Internet of Things, people are introducing new assets all the time. So you may have your catering companies plugging in your coffee machine. And can you make sure, are you able to trust that they are keeping that up to date, or do they really just care about delivering you the coffee? I think it's the second one, but I don't know, you might have some really secure catering companies. And the second one, so what if some people have aircon across their offices, maybe even in your data center that can be remotely controlled? Have you made sure that that's up to date? Anyone experienced some? I expect fewer hands, but okay, cool. So problem summary. Traditional scanning of large IP ranges is really noisy. It can have an impact on your servers, your critical applications, and also it's very unlikely that it's going to get all of your assets. Additionally, keeping an up-to-date CMDB because of the rise of being able to spin up assets more quickly is going to be really difficult. And so it's difficult to know where all your assets are. So if you, like Simply Business, allow for remote working, allow for a DevOps way of working, so you're continuously spinning up new servers, gone are the days where it takes a week to get a few servers up. And if you're promoting the new technologies such as containers, then you may need to consider all or some of the following. So let me just take a sec. Number 1, passive network monitoring. So passive network monitoring is essentially taking a tap of your network traffic and analyzing it for any identification of potentially out-of-date software or any vulnerabilities on the network layer. Also, it's a really great way for asset discovery without having to scan your entire IP range and look for what responds. And it allows you to look for vulnerabilities on assets you may not be allowed to scan. So potentially legacy servers that your IT team don't want you to scan, you can still hear their traffic. Does anyone here use passive network monitoring at all? Cool. Number 2, agents. So 007 up there. Having agents built into the base image of your devices means that when a developer spins up a new asset in the cloud, you don't have to worry about them telling you about it so that you can scan it, because it's built there already. It's already in your queue, ready to be scanned. And agents these days, they're getting really popular. So vendors are building them for a lot of different devices. So we have them for lots of end user devices. If you use Mac OS, if you use Windows, Linux, Amazon servers, and Windows servers, and so on. And yeah, it's really easy to build it into the base image. So, and number 3, container registry scanning. So containers are really short-lived. I found out a fact online that the average container lives for 2.5 days, and they lack regular IP addresses so that you can do a scan, and they lack good ability to authenticate to them using traditional scanning. However, because they exist on your network, it's really important that you still scan these containers. And so using container registry scanning allows you to scan the base, like the container, and it actually prevents your vulnerabilities getting there before in production. So what does this enable for Simply Business? there's a little image that's not popped up. There we are. So you may have, I obviously mentioned that we allow for a lot of flexible working here at Simply Business, but additionally, you may have read in the newspapers that we are allowing our call center staff to work or we're trialing them to work a 4-day working week without dropping pay as well. So that's really cool. And we're also allowing them to work from home. And this is something that's like really new in the industry. So we had to think of a creative way to be able to support them and still do that securely. So using agents allows us to do that while they're working from home. And referring back to what my colleague Panna said, we have a lot of like regulatory bodies that require vulnerability management programs. And this has assisted us with trading in the state of New York, so the cybersecurity regulations, becoming PCI compliant, so being able to take payments. And additionally, we were recently bought out a couple of years ago by Travelers, who are, a global insurance company. And so we had to meet requirements that they require of us to act securely, obviously, and be secure. So we have to do a lot of this. Okay, that's it. So I'm going to hand over to the security engineering team for web app scanning. Thank you very much.
Hello. Thank you, Laura. Thank you. So that kind of addresses the stuff we have, from a infrastructure point of view, stuff that has CVEs. Obviously, we're in a company, we build our own products and services. So what do you do about those? You're not going to find a CVE for those, but they definitely have bugs in. We definitely need to find them. So here, we're just going to talk a little bit about that, me and Dan. To be fair to the team, I just look after it. Dan and the gang look after everything. They're the real stars. So yeah, moving on. So our vision really, if you can think of the Steve Ballmer quote about developers, we only enable security for the business. We don't do security. So we need to make sure that whatever we choose works for them. So remedial workflow, has to be quick and has to support an evolving tech stack. So what we use today is predominantly Ruby. There's a lot of stuff that's coming, React, JavaScript, those kind of things. And a lot of the providers out there are not really supporting those platforms. And also our engineers, so AppSec engineers, we can't sit there triaging bugs all day. It has to be empowerment. We have to empower these people to do this. And we can't also sit there looking at loads of false positives or even worse, false negatives. So, Dan.
So I'm going to walk you through what our testing methodology looked like and some of the challenges we faced along the way. So we based all our evaluation around OWASP Juice Shop. Shout out to anyone who's contributed to Juice Shop. That was really helpful. So we were hosting a known vulnerable application in an AWS account that we owned that was connected up to one of our company credit cards. So in the event that someone got RCE on this container, we wanted to make sure that the blast radius was nice and limited. If someone's mining Bitcoin on one Docker container, that's not the end of the world. If they've spun up 30 GPU instances in every AWS region, that's much more of a problem. We wanted to minimize costs by only spinning this, environment up when we were actually using it. And we needed to make sure it was really easy to just clear everything away when we were done. So with that in mind, Docker, Packer, and Terraform to the rescue. Anyone that's had a lengthy conversation with me about tech will learn pretty quickly. I'm a big fan of HashiCorp's products, particularly Packer and Terraform. So what I ended up doing was I hosted Juice Shop in a Docker container, mostly because I didn't want to worry about setting up a database for something I was going to throw away later. But I didn't want to, every time I spun this environment up, go and install Docker, configure the user permissions so that I could run Docker commands without root, etc., etc. So I used Packer to build a base image that had all of this stuff set up already. So Packer handled the setup process, so spinning up a temporary AMI, a temporary EC2 instance, running an Ansible playbook to do all the provisioning, and then taking an EBS snapshot and converting that to an AMI so that next time I launched an EC2 instance, it'd be launching with all of this configuration already sorted out. And I use Terraform to set up a completely isolated environment inside this account. So completely isolated VPC, subnet rules, security groups, IAM policies, so that if you did pop the container and break out and you were able to get to the metadata service, not saying that anyone's been owned by the EC2 metadata service recently, that you wouldn't then be able to go and pivot around inside our environment and do nasty stuff. So some of the challenges we faced. Single page app support. So a lot of the people that we evaluated, their single page app support was either non-existent or it was there, but it wasn't, it was pretty flaky. And the reason for this is what a lot of these tools do is they will issue an HTTP request and get back some content from the server, but they'll then crawl just the content they received looking for links to then go and make requests to and try and map out the application. If you've got a single page app that is not doing server-side rendering, what you'll get back is like a dozen lines of HTML, a style sheet, and a bundle of JavaScript. And there's going to be no links in there for this crawler to make further requests to. Ideally, what you want to be doing is downloading that content and then rendering that JavaScript and creating that DOM so that you can then go and spider that content and browse the application as if you are a real user. A couple of the vendors I looked at do this. The majority of them do not yet, presumably because running headless Chrome uses a lot of RAM and making an HTTP request doesn't. We also had issues with bad vuln detection. So we were using Juice Shop, so we know where the vulns are. We know how many there are. If you want to know where all these vulns are, there's a handy link. So when these providers did have single page app support, sometimes they would just not find some of these vulns. So it'd be like a high sev SQL injection and a scanner would just completely miss this, which is kind of a deal breaker. Scan time. So a lot of the scan times for these tools is measured in hours. We want to get to a point where every single merge to master and thus deploy to development and then deploy to production is being scanned before it goes to prod. If you've got a scan time that's measured in multiple hours, we're going to really not make friends with our development teams. So we want to get that down to like 20 minutes, ideally, faster if we can manage it. One provider had an option for limiting scan time, at which point it'd stop and then start compiling the results. And their minimum time was 24 hours, which our devs are not going to be happy if we're saying, you can do a deploy to production tomorrow. We also had issues with a high false positive rate. So a lot of these tools, what they will do is they will send a benign request to an endpoint they've found. And then they will send a malicious payload. And if they see a difference in the response they get, so say the first one gives you back a 200, and the second one gives you back an HTTP 503 service unavailable, then it's going to say, oh, we've got different behavior. There might be something up there. And these scans will generate a lot of requests. Now, initially, I was testing this with a single Docker container, and it did not handle the amount of load I threw at it very gracefully. So I got hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of false positives come back where it was actually the application saying, I can't handle this request right now. So I fixed this by putting an Nginx reverse proxy in front of 3 application containers. And then my results turned out to be like 15 findings, which is much better. That's exactly what I was expecting. We also have the problem of authenticated scanning and MFA. Now, this is quite a nice problem to have. If the problem you've got with your vuln scanning is that all of your apps have got MFA in front of it and you don't know how to solve that, you're in a really good position and I envy you, because 100% MFA would be amazing. Authenticated scanning is generally supported, but it will be things like you need to upload a Selenium script and they'll give you no guidance on what that script should look like, where the entry point needs to be. They won't tell you what version of Selenium you need to use. And as a former quality engineer, I can tell you that that starts getting really annoying really quickly. Or they'll say, where's the form endpoint and what credentials do we need to supply? And you've got to hope that your form plays nicely with how they're going to interact with it. It's also not something you can easily provide self-service onboarding for. So if you say to a team, we need to know where your scanning endpoint, where your login endpoint is, and we also need a Selenium script with you that will drive your login flow just right, that's not something you can easily just say, you can go and onboard yourself. You need a hand-holding approach to that. So that's something we want to get better at. And how do we support MFA? So I've got an idea about how we can fix this, but if you've got, say, SMS-based multi-factor, which is fairly common, not great, but it's better than nothing, then you need either some way of stubbing out your SMS service, or you need some way of turning that off in your staging environment, but then you don't have a realistic application to scan. If you've got TOTP, maybe you can set up like a test environment TOTP seed and fake it that way. But again, it starts getting really complicated. And lastly, like, is free really free? So not to diss Arachne. Arachne is great. But by the time you've set up your scanning infrastructure and you account for all of the effort it's going to require for you to patch that scanning infrastructure and scale to accommodate demand and keep Arachne itself up to date, and deal with any troubleshooting you need to do, the costs start adding up real quick, just in infrastructure costs and engineering salary. So I'm going to pass you back to Ed for a look at what sort of things are on our roadmap for DAST and what the road ahead looks like for us.
I told you that he had the secret sauce, right? So not wrong. Okay, so still lots to do. We know it's a journey, not a destination, so we're going to keep plugging away. Definitely self-service. We can't be the blockers for this stuff. We've got to automate it. Yeah, mentioned about the testing pass MFA. We want to get in the position where all our apps do have MFA. Still a long way to go. We also need to make sure this stuff goes to their backlogs. One thing we're looking at is like Jira integration, Trello integration. And our product teams have a habit now of looking at Slack alerts. So if you get an alert in your Slack channel, hey Peter V, you'll do something about it if it's not complained to me because I've got a problem. But that's where they're looking. So we also know that continuously scanning, so day to day is going to cause a lot of problems. There's going to be lots of the same stuff each day. So we need to make sure we can kind of deduplicate that. So we looked at a few products. We might have to build something, I don't know. And then metrics and analytics for what our engineering teams are doing. That's going to drive our education strategy. So bringing that back to like our compliance and assurance teams and making sure that we're focusing on the right areas. And then as always, let's go again. Let's improve.